We're moving right along with this series for top 5 greatest players in NBA franchise history. We're already up to the Portland Trailblazers. Man, this feels like it's been going by quickly, but without any further ado, let's dive right into it. If this is your first time catching a vid in this series, I got the playlist in the description box and the comments so you can check out some of the other vids in this series. And if you don't know, the one big thing I put on this to make these lists a little more interesting was I can only use a player one time through the entire series. So I can only use LeBron through the entire series once. I can only use Shaq through the entire series once, which varies up the names on the list a little bit for some of these teams that had the same player. But let's get right into it. With the Portland Trailblazers, we'll start with a few honorable mentions. We're going to start with C.J. McCollum. Now, C.J. McCollum was a good number two in the backcourt with Dame during their time in Portland. And while we always give Dame credit for leading the way for the Blazers, leading a few deep playoff runs, C.J. McCollum during his time was a contributor to those deep runs as well. Now, he wasn't the lead guy, he wasn't a great player, but he was good enough to at least offer Dame some help and at least take a little bit of the weight off him. And that did play a role in the Blazers at least making a few deep playoff runs. So C.J. McCollum, while he wasn't great, he was somewhat of a help to Dame. Easily the best help Damian Lillard had during his tenure with the Blazers. So he's not quite a top 5, but at least worthy of an honorable mention. Now another one is Brandon Roy. Now if it weren't for injuries, I would easily have him in the top 5, but due to his shortened career, due to his knees, he just misses the cut on the outside. So, I can only put him as an honorable mention, which is kind of a shame. Because Brandon Roy, when he was healthy, he was on the court, taking the league by storm. And it's just ultimately, it's a shame. He's one of those big what could have beens. I mean, if you do NBA My League and you simulate through different eras, you'll see that Brandon Roy is usually one of the most dominant players in those resims, but that's because when he was on, he was a difference maker, but he didn't have a long enough run, and he wasn't available enough for him to be a top 5, so I only put Brandon Roy as an honorable mention for that reason, because his on-the-court production's at least worthy of acknowledgement, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to crack the top 5. And you'll start to understand more as to why once I actually get into the top 5. But there's one more honorable mention. Now, I know I'll butcher his first name, but it starts Ave. I know I'll butcher it. It's Sabonis. Now, he was a big man. He was from 95 to 03. He played a role in those Trailblazers teams post-Clyde being in contention. He was on that 2000s Blazers team that came close against the Lakers. Now, he wasn't a great player, but he was a good big man and at least worthy of a mention throughout Blazers history. Now, with that being said, we're going to get on to the top 5. And you'll notice there are several bigs in the top 5, starting with LaMarcus Aldridge. LaMarcus Aldridge came in after the 06 draft class during a down period for the Blazers, where their glory years were behind them, and he was the lead guy behind the Blazers from the late 2000s into the 2010s. He's most famously remembered as a part of that 09-2010 Blazers team that had a good regular season and made a run to the playoffs. Now, you also had Brandon Roy, when available, was a contributing factor to that, but I'll go with Aldridge as the number 5 spot because of his longevity with them. He was consistently one of the better big men of his era, consistently averaging over 20 points. Now, the Blazers never went deep with Aldridge, but during his time there, he was one of the better big men, and he helped keep the Trailblazers in the mix. So I got to consider him number 5. While maybe he wasn't great, he wasn't as great as some of the others, still a pretty damn good player in Blazers history, at least worthy of that spot. Now we're going to get on to number 4. Here's another guy from those late 70s Blazers teams that played alongside the late, great Bill Walton. Maurice Lucas. He was the number 2 big man on that team. Late 70s. He was there from 76 to 1980. He made 4 All-Stars during that time and was the key contributor behind Bill Walton in that 77 championship win. Now, it wasn't a long run, but for the time it lasted, pretty darn good. Helped bring a championship to the team. Certainly worthy to me of top 5 Blazers of all time. One of the better big men of his era. Now, granted, it wasn't long, but the quality of his run is what I got to put him on the top 5. I put him on there because he was a key contributor to the glory days of the early years of the glory days of the Trailblazers. Now, moving on to number 3. I got Damian Lillard, number 3. Now, I put Dame over Lucas because Dame had a longer run. And going again with quality of run, Dame was the heart and soul of that Blazers franchise. When he got hot, you remember he led the game-winning shot against several game winners in the playoffs. Remember 2014 against the Houston Rockets in the opening round. 2019 against the OKC Thunder during Westbrook's final season with them. Dame hit those buzzer beaters in the opening round. And remember, he carried them deep to the conference finals 2019 against the Warriors. And consistently throughout that tenure, Damian Lillard led the Trailblazers to playoff contention. And he was kind of one of the last loyal guys before he finally went to Milwaukee in 2023. And yeah, in one of the great three-point shooters of his era and of all time. A lot of good you can say about Damian Lillard, a guy who carried the Trailblazers into the 2010s when they were kind of on the, they're a bit on the downswing. LaMarcus Aldridge left, Brandon Roy's knees pushed him out of the NBA. Damian Lillard took over and led that team a few times, got him on the cusp of a finals appearance. Couldn't quite get him over the hump, but he got him close. But that is also in part because the Blazers didn't really do a great job building a team, which is the shame of his run. But for his efforts, man, he certainly gets the number 3 spot. Number 2, I'm going to go with the late, great Bill Walton. We talked about this last year on the Pick and Roll podcast after his passing. He was kind of, in a way, a trailblazer to the game. Now, in terms of to the modern centers, his three-point shooting wasn't on point, but all the other aspects of his game were on point. Rebounding, passing, his basketball IQ, all on point. And during his tenure with the Blazers, he helped bring a championship to that team as the lead guy, with Maurice Lucas being the number 2. Bill Walton was the lead guy for that team, brought them that last championship. And he's considered one of the all-time greats, top 50 and top 75. Now, injury shortened is what could have been. He could have had a little bit of a longer run, but during the time it lasted, he dominated the game. It was one of the dominant players of his era. Top 50, top 75 anniversary. Jersey retired by the Blazers, not to mention finals MVP. Bill Walton is easily one of the main names that comes to mind with his history. But there's one more player over him, and that's a player who had a longer tenure. Number 1, Clyde Drexler. Clyde the Glide Drexler. Now, even though he didn't win any championships, he had a much longer run there with more dominance. And he did get the Blazers on the cusp numerous times. He got them to 2 finals appearances. One where they fell short against the bad boy Pistons, and then another where they fell short to the Bulls. However, during that time he was there, for his career, he was a 10-time All-Star. And he was, even in the later stage of his career with the Rockets, even though this is off subject with the Blazers, he still was putting up good statistics. Throughout most of his career, he would average at least 15 plus a game, usually 20 plus a game. Now remember, during that era, you didn't really see as many 30 and 40 point averages in that era. So Clyde Drexler averaging over 20 consistently through his career was considered damn good during that era. And plus he had a long run of dominance too. Blazers were always in the mix. He was usually always in All-NBA, usually always part of the All-Star team, always kept the Blazers on the cusp. Got him to 2 finals appearances. And with all due respect to Bill Walton, he did so over a longer period of time. So for that, I got him as number 1. And when it comes to names in their franchise's history, he's the main name that people point to. Especially a lot of younger fans. They think of the Portland Trail Blazers historically. They'll point to Clyde Drexler. Even if they didn't get to see him play, they've done their research and they know who he is. So for that reason, I got him as well as dominant on the court. I got him as the number 1 player. But you guys comment, let me know who your top 5 Portland Trail Blazers are. Make sure to also drop a like and subscribe for more content. And so then the next installment, we got the Sacramento Kings coming up, so stay tuned.